If you look over there, there's the memorial. There's a rock in the middle of the park here, and this is what it says. This beautiful 64-acre park is part of an 840-acre land grant from King George II of England. Since the original grant, this prime farmland has served many families. In 1990, the town of Gardner purchased the property from Dudley and Sarah Buffalo and built this park for the enduring pleasure and comfort of all its families. And now I'll just scroll and show. That's all the land. And then back to the memorial. If you haven't yet, go attack the day in your neighborhood. Thanks for watching Attack Adventures. Go subscribe and hit that like button and keep continuing watching. Gardner Veterans Memorial. Welcome to Attack Adventures today. We are here today in Gardner, North Carolina, which is near Raleigh, North Carolina. Throughout American history, individuals have sacrificed themselves to protect their homeland, security, liberty, define themselves and their freedoms, and defend their interests. With the exception of the 1920s, Americans had been at war in every decade since their Declaration of Independence in 1776. This memorial honors the military service and personal sacrifices of Americans in war, particularly those from this region of North Carolina, and the openings that reveal the wide vista beyond this memorial also acknowledges those decades when service and sacrifice secured peace on the home front. And this is all the emblems. This memorial introductory panel was given in honor of James Lucas Sr. by his loving family. Mr. Lucas was a Gardner resident, Gardner business owner, and World War II vet. He was in the 828 Bomb Squadron, 485th Bomb Group, and flew 51 missions in a B-24 Liberator aircraft. As a tail gunner, he was awarded numerous medals during his service, including the Presidential Ribbon and the Distinguished Flying Cross. The backs of the memorial is made out of brick and clay from North Carolina. And then, as you will see as we go down further, there's bricks with names and to honor certain military men and women. Right here is Betsy M. Fernandez. She was the SFC U.S. Army, 5/16/94 to 9/3/15, Gardner, NC. These are reflection benches where you can sit here and look at the walls. And it started in, they have it numbered from 1800s. Better to fight for something than to live for nothing. General Patton. In today's world, we're stepping on these veterans' names that fought for us, and died for your freedom. Some people say, "Oh, I don't care. They didn't do nothing. All they were in the military," but actually they do a lot for us in peacetime and in wartime. 1980. The people that built and designed this memorial, their name was Clearscapes of Raleigh. The history panels is laid with bricks in honor of those who served the armed forces. These bricks are donated by family and friends in honor or in memory of that individual. Their placement represents the foundation of service our veterans provided for our country. It looks like stars, I guess. They don't say what this represents. Unless it's on the ground and we can't see it because of the snow. "2000. A strong stand against all terrorist acts, whether committed by foe or friend. September 11th attacks on the United States in '01 were the first foreign aggression on American soil since World War II. In response, the United States initiated Operation Enduring Freedom less than a month later, invading Afghanistan and overthrowing the Taliban, who had harbored and given aid to the 9/11 terrorists. Since the Persian Gulf War, Iraq had been considered a sponsor of terrorism and became an immediate target for the war on terror. The Iraq War began in '03 and ended in 2011. In both Afghanistan and Iraq, the United States established new governments in order to minimize future terrorist activities. Over 3,000 Americans died on 9/11. In 1940, the Arsenal of Democracy. On 7th of December 1941, Japanese planes swooped down on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, drawing the United States into the war with the Allies against the Axis powers. Some 362,000 North Carolinians, included 7,000 women, entered the armed services during World War II. Another 4,000 women served in auxiliary organizations like the WAC and the Waves. North Carolinians served in every important battle zone from Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima in the Pacific Theater to the invasion of North Africa. They also protected the North Carolina coast, Torpedo Junction, from German U-boats. They landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944, and swept across France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, defeating the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge. Finally, on May 8, 1945, the Germans surrendered, and 4 months later, the Japanese surrendered as 1950. I will defend Korea as I would my own country. At the end of World War II, the Allies divided former Axis powers and the colonials, including Korea, which had been controlled by Japan. The 38th parallel became a political border between communist North Korea and capitalist South Korea. The situation escalated into open warfare when North Korea forces invaded the South in 1950. As the first military conflict of the Cold War, 47 through 91, the Korean War engaged the United Nations and the United States in an effort to contain communism. While both sides saw military success, the war resulted in an armistice and the establishment of the Korean Demilitarized Zone, which was thereafter patrolled by Korean, American, and United Nations troops. The Korean War was the first in which black and white Americans served interrogated troops. Additionally, women served active duty as nurses and in supply units. American casualties totaled slightly over 54,000 of these 784 came home from North Carolina. 1960. Who is the enemy? The Vietnam War was the second major conflict of the Cold War. The conflict began in the 1950s as a colonial war in which the Vietnamese fought against France with the support of American military advisors. When the France withdrew, the United States feared a communist takeover and escalated involvement in the early 1960s, part of their wider strategy of containing communism. Rumors of attacks on American warships promoted Congress to approve the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in August in '64, giving the president power to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia without declaring war. In order to defend United States Air Force bases, Marines were dispatched to South Vietnam in '65. This marked the beginning of the American Ground War. In '68, the North Vietnamese surprised the Americans with the Tet Offense, shocking the American public into questioning the war and their government. 1970, it became necessary to destroy the town to save it. Intent on ending the war, President Nixon began to withdraw troops, hoping to empower South Vietnam to defend itself through a policy of Vietnamization. To provide time for the South Vietnamese, the United States bombed the neutral nations of Laos and Cambodia to destroy North Vietnamese bases and supply lines. The invasion sparked nationwide protests, and when 4 students were killed at protests at Kent State in '70, anti-war sentiment grew. The United States began drastically reducing troops, still not until North Vietnam's capture of Saigon in April 1975 did the United States evacuate South Vietnam. The two states reunified under communist rule the following year. The Vietnam War left the United States traumatized. The nation had spent over $150 billion in a losing effort that cost more than 58,000 American lives, over 1,600 which were North Carolinians. Additionally, more than 150,000 were wounded, and at least 21,000 were permanently disabled, and thousands remain missing in action. 1910. The world must be made safe for democracy. By 1917, the sinking of American ships with the loss of American lives caused the United States to join the Allies in their war against the Central Powers, which had been raging since 1914. Training camps were established throughout the nation, with Fort Bragg, Greene, and Polk in North Carolina. Over 86,000 North Carolinians went off to war, some playing roles in major action. The 13th Division helped to break the Hindenburg Line, and the 81st, or Wildcat, Division took part in the Moose Aragon offense in the last days of war. World War I was the first modern war employing new technologies like howitzers, airplanes, chemical warfare, and U-boats. German U-boats cruised the North Carolina coastline, and one shell sunk the Diamond Shoals lightship in 1918. Over 53,000 Americans died in World War I, 2,375 of them from North Carolina. Many others were casualties, carrying with them the wounds of war for the remainder of their lives. What a cruel thing is war. The American Civil War was fought for many reasons. Some argue that the election of Abraham Lincoln threatened states' rights. Others wanted to protect their economic investments, particularly slavery from northern or abolitionists. Regardless of their reason, over 125,000 North Carolinians joined the war effort, comprising over 1/6 of the Confederacy military. The majority fought on Virginia's battlefields, and approximate 1/5 of those who surrendered under Lee were North Carolinians. The war was devastating. Over 19,000 North Carolinians were killed in battle, and another 20,000 died of diseases greater than any other Confederate state. But war conditions also took a toll in civilian deaths, and thousands of men returned home impaired by lost eyes, arms, and legs. Other North Carolinians organized 9 regiments that fought for the Union, 2 volunteer regiments from the east, 2 infantry regiments from the west, and 5 U.S. colored troops formed by free black North Carolinians. They too lost large numbers of soldiers. We are skipping over some of these because it will be too much to read of how many wars we've been in. But 1830, be men, be free men. By 1835, thousands of Americans had migrated to the Mexican territory of Texas. Among them, hundreds of North Carolinians when the Mexican president tried to impose greater authority over the territories. Secession movements and violence erupted in several Mexican states. In Texas, the war ended at the Battle of San Jacinto, where General Sam Houston led the Texan army to victory against General Santa Anna, who was captured shortly after the battle. His captors forced Santa Anna to recognize the Republic of Texas in 1836. 1780, the defense of American liberty. 1770, we are all free men. In 1770, violence erupted across North Carolina. Frustrated with the rural government, colonists were protesting taxes, fees, governmental malpractice, and a rural governor who would not address their issues. They determined to regulate society themselves, angering the rural governor who raised a militia. At the Battle of Alamance in 1771, the rural troops defeated the regulators, ending the revolt, but not solving the problem for which the regulators had fought and died. Similar frustrations grew across the colonies, leading in 1775 to armed resistance against British troops in Boston. Just weeks after the outbreak of fighting at Lexington and Concord, Congress appointed George Washington commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. In 77, North Carolina had raised 10 regiments for the Continental Army, and thousands of others had joined militias. Thousands also formed their own Tory armies to support the British. As the Revolutionary War raged, North Carolinians fought themselves in a civil war, neighbor against neighbor, and sometimes brother against brother. We are the free-born sons and daughters of America. We are all free men and women. We defend the American flag, and we need to defend the American flag no matter what. So go attack the day in your neighborhood and watch Attack Adventures